Tim. Hey, Adam. All right. We might kick it off. We've got a jam-packed session today. As I mentioned, I'm James Trezise. I'm the CEO of the Biodiversity Council. The Biodiversity Council, as hopefully most of you know, is an expert body. It was originally a partnership between 11 universities and some of Australia's leading philanthropists, including many of you on the call today, to be an expert voice for nature. And the Nature Media Centre is an important partnership between the Biodiversity Council, Pew Charitable Trust and the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, which we're here to talk about today. This session is going to be recorded. It's going to be a facilitated panel discussion. And we hope there'll be some time for people to have questions. If you do have questions as we're talking, feel free to just pop them into the chat. I'd like to kick off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. I'm dialing in from Ngunnawal Ngambri country. Pay my respects to elders past and present and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people on the call today. I'm really keen to have this conversation. We've got some amazing speakers, and I'm really keen to introduce you to them all. Originally, we hoped to have Jodie Gunn on the call from Alka. Jodie had a unfortunate diary clash, but thankfully, Erin Farley, the director of the Nature Media Centre, can step in and give you a bit of background about where the project originated from. So Erin has had a 20-year experience working in strategic communications and media liaison in environment organisations, citizen science groups and government organisations. We've also got Jim Phillipson from Rendere Trust, who's also the chair of the Nature Impact Collective. And in 2018, Jim and his wife established Rendere. Heather, I think Heather's on the call, to a platform for 100% pledge to environmental conservation and committed to basically supporting organisations like the Biodiversity Council. Jim is well known in our circles as an amazing patron and someone who's driven so much change and action, along with many other members on the call. Alongside Jim and Erin, we've got Gregg Borschmann, who's an incredibly storied and experienced journalist. I first interacted with Gregg when doing on ABC Radio, as I think you're the producer and I was the talent, and we were having good chats. And Gregg's been an excellent champion for the environment and the media through his very long and storied career. And of course, we've got Professor Leslie Hughes. And so Leslie probably needs no introduction to anyone on this call. Leslie is a member of both the Biodiversity Council, but also a founding member and a leader in the Climate Council, and has got a lot of experience across both realms, and is a font of knowledge on both biodiversity and the impacts of climate change. And so I might kick us off there, Leslie, to talk about your experiences. And what is the kind of science telling us about the state of nature and some of the key drivers of biodiversity decline? I think a lot of people on this call will have some idea, but it's best hearing it from the experts straight up.
Thanks, James. Well, good evening, everybody. Great that you could join us this evening. Well, none of you will be surprised when I say that nature in Australia and globally is in a pretty serious decline. Every 5 years, the Australian government has to produce a State of the Environment report, and each one has got a worse picture than the previous one, showing that nature continues to decline in Australia. There are many drivers of that. Habitat loss is a huge one, deforestation. But if we put that together with invasive species, especially things like foxes and cats, together with over-allocation of our fresh water, with pollution, with over-harvesting, and of course, climate change sits like this big black cloud on top of all of those other threats. making most of them worse. A few years ago, 18 colleagues and I wrote a paper called about 19 ecosystems in Australia being in some sort of state of collapse. None of them had collapsed altogether, but they were all showing signs of collapse at some way. Ecosystems all the way from Cape York down to the subantarctic islands, and no ecosystem that we looked at was spared that assessment. So things are grim. We've already got one of the highest extinction rates, well, the highest extinction rate of mammals in the world, and high extinction rates of plants and other things. Many populations of rare and endangered species continue to decline, and we really have to turn that around and before we lose anything more. So the outlook at the moment is not good. We need to spend a hell of a lot more money on our environment and turn things around. We absolutely need environmental law reform, as is in the press a lot now. And the Biodiversity Council has been very active in at least attempting to advise government as to how that should be done. I'll leave it there, James, for the moment.
Thanks, Leslie. It's funny you mentioned that, and this isn't scripted by any way, but we were up meeting the minister's office this week, and the minister last week, as was half the environment movement on that. And so, yeah, I think many people on this call would be aware that it's a debate that's playing out. But it probably leads me to this next question, which is related, because with the National Environmental Law Reform has been in the media, and it's and it played quite a pivotal role in shaping what happened under the last term of government. So, in your experience as a scientist, as an expert across the realms of biodiversity and climate, how have you seen the media shape policy outcomes or discuss, for better or for worse?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, of course, and I know we're going to talk about misinformation a bit later on. The media can be an extraordinarily, if it's done well, an extraordinarily powerful force. So just recently, the algal bloom in South Australia and bleaching in the Ningaloo Reef has been at the forefront of nature stories. We see a lot more bad stories than we do see good stories, but the media plays an enormously important role in bringing those stories, both good stories and bad stories, to the attention of the public. I will relay, though, one sort of sad anecdote in my experience. So the Climate Council in times past has taken groups of journalists up to the Great Barrier Reef to see bleaching in the hope that they would report more on bleaching. And for the first few bleaching events in the last decade, that was very successful. We got lots and lots of stories from those journalists we took. The last couple of bleaching events, we've attempted to do the same thing, and we just haven't got enough media interest, because I'm afraid the media has got bored with bleaching. And that means that the shocking state of the Great Barrier Reef and now Ningaloo, it does not have the prominence that it should have. So that's been just my own observations of how the media cycle runs. It's really hard to maintain interest both in the public and in the media when there's a continual deluge of the same bad story all the time. So that is one of the challenges that the Nature Media Centre hopefully will be around to tackle.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a good segue to your experiences, Greg. In a similar way, nature's in crisis. In a similar way, our media system is in a bit of a crisis, and the attention of editors and how they prioritize stories is as a challenge, as kind of what Leslie's just alluded to. What are your thoughts on the state of media generally as a sector, and what are your reflections on what you've seen when it comes to nature reporting?
Look, I think Leslie's just hit it on the head, because Media is a wicked beast that really does thrive on bad news, but bad news can be normalised. And I'm really shocked to hear that story, Leslie. I have
But maybe not surprised, Greg.
maybe not surprised, but perhaps I'll start here. Actually, I was going to come to this second, James, but behind me there's a poster on the wall of The Age, 26th of November 1985, and The Age sent. I was a pimply-faced cadet back then, and The Age sent me and their most senior feature writer to the Great Barrier Reef to write features and news stories about the reef. And we thought we were doing every imaginable threat to the reef: tourism, pollution, crown of thorns starfish, overfishing. We didn't mention, in all those tens of thousands of words, we didn't mention climate. And the impact that climate, the overarching impact that climate is now having on the reef, we all know about. So I think the problem that I see in the media is, tyrannized by its own deadlines, too many crises to report, not enough foot soldiers in the trenches, and bugger all corporate memory. But the problem is nature's operating on a different set of timelines. And if we sell nature, if we continue to sell nature as a little good news story here or another bad news story here, we're kind of missing that longer term perspective that we need on what is happening to nature, sometimes that we can't control, but other times that we can control.
Yeah, excellent. And from your experience in the actual newsroom, how have you seen the changes in the media ecosystem as a sector, as an industry?
Look, I was very lucky, James. For 20 years, I was working in a privileged, well-resourced bubble. There was a team of 12 of us, producers and reporters, churning out breakfast, 3 hours of breakfast radio every day. And, that's extraordinary when you think about the shoestring that a lot of media operates on these days. But, we were content rich, and we also treated news and the environment and climate and nature and fact checking seriously. That said, it was always a challenge, and the environment sort of bailiwick fell to me by agitation and choice. And, I can't tell you how often it was seen to be either off the pace or simply more bad news. Leslie's problem with, well, we've had 5 or 6 bleachings now. Sorry, we've done that story. So making it relevant was important. Making it stack up was important. The ground truthing. And I know for the first 10 years I did that job, we did not report that space as well as we could have or should have. And for me, it was such a godsend when the Australian Science Media Centre turned up and when the Climate Media Centre turned up. I cannot tell you what a difference that made to how I was able to pitch and report on those stories, because, I wasn't Robin Williams coming into the office at dawn every day, able to shut my phones and sit there for at least 1 or 2 hours with every sort of publication and piece of literature that I needed to get my head around to do the job that I was being asked to do. So nature in some ways serves in on those 2 existing climate media centres, but I think as Leslie has kind of alluded to, and yourself, there is a compelling case now for nature having its own opera house and being centre stage.
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely the need now, and we're kind of realizing the conjoined crisis between what's happening with climate and also what's happening with biodiversity, and they are 2 very interlinked unnatural phenomenons that we need to tackle, and biodiversity and what's happening to nature. We need more Australians to appreciate it. I say is a kind of someone who's trying to do that in my own organization and personal capacity. So, Erin, you've had a lot of experience in strategic comms as a media advisor, as a campaigner, as someone who knows how the media works. You were brought on to do the scoping of the Nature Media Centre to see if it was something that should be pursued. And so was hoping that you might be able to share your learnings or insights from that exercise.
Sure, thanks, James, and hi, everybody. Yeah, so I guess at the beginning of this project, we started with a scoping exercise, I guess, really to examine both what the research was telling us and also consult with journalists and nature champions about what was most needed if there, it was going to be a nature media centre. And I guess the starting point for that was that we know that people feel really deeply that nature is part of what it means to be Australian. It's really recognised as important to our culture and our health and our economy when you talk to people and the community. And almost all Australians across party lines believe that we should be protecting and respecting our unique landscapes and nature, but that care is not translating into sufficient pressure on decision makers, and it's not translating into behaviour change or direct action to turn the nature crisis that Leslie so evocatively described. So we know that that level of concern fluctuates when you compare nature and environment with other issues. And the other thing that is happening and increasing over time is that people are feeling more disconnected from nature. And that has risen even more since the pandemic, when I think, quite a few people experienced a bit of a period where, they were spending more time in their nature around, their local area. Now things have changed back again, and, we're seeing that disconnection increasing. And then at the same time, as Gregg was describing, we've got Australian media outlets under more and different kinds of pressure than they've ever been before. So I interviewed quite a few journalists from a range of different outlets, and they all had very similar stories to tell. I guess one, that just the resources that journalists have available is so much less than there used to be. So there's very few rounds reporters left in Australia of any type, and environment, I think there's probably maybe 5, something like that. So many media outlets, particularly in regional and rural areas, have also closed. So there's been, I think, over 161 news outlets have closed between January 2019 and March 2024. So those are 161 communities that, no longer have their own local news happening, let alone, kind of reporting on nature in their area. And for the ones that are left, I was chatting to a local independent news maker just last week, and they were telling me that there's an expectation that reporters will deliver as many as 7 stories a day. So their ability to go out and report and talk to the community and do anything that is actually going to connect people and, tell that story is very limited. So, the other thing that I think has come through really clearly, and I had this, from a number of environment reporters, is just that balance of how to deal with news avoidance and how to talk about nature in a way that doesn't switch people off, but also is telling the state of the crisis. So those are, some of the things that came across really clearly in the scoping report. I think some of the solutions that people were talking about, and there are a lot, that it was a really amazing experience to talk to so many people who had so many ideas about what we can do better. And a lot of it came down to having authentic and credible messengers, local people in their communities talking about what they're doing and skilling them up to be able to do that in a way that empowers and leaves people with a sense of hope, rather than that sense of despair that is what switches people off, and is what leaves journalists not feeling like they can cover nature properly. So those are the kind of two themes that we came up with, is like how we can boost capacity for newsrooms that need it, and how we can build the skills for messengers who can then go out there and be connecting with their community.
Awesome. It's almost like walking a tightrope, I find. Like when you're in the media, you're kind of trying to talk about the crisis, talk about the challenge, but you also don't want to deplete people's hope budget. You want to give a sense that it's a tractable and solvable problem. And I actually had a conversation with someone at one point where they kind of lifted me up, because the biodiversity crisis is, there's a whole host of challenges there, but Leslie kind of nailed it with a better legal framework, better regulatory system, and a more investment in it, like significantly more investment, we can give nature a fighting chance. And so it's quite a tractable medium-term solution that sits in front of us. It's just kind of building up the preconditions for that, where the media narrative comes into it. So misinformation and disinformation, and I think everyone's kind of seeing that even more prolific post-COVID, post lockdowns, and the prevalence of social media. And I think AI is going to be even more interesting in this space as well. At the beginning of the year, we saw misinformation play quite an active role in debates around establishing new national parks, for example. We've seen misinformation and disinformation funded by some of the wealthiest companies in the world when it comes to climate change over decades, to kind of sow the seeds of doubt. So I guess starting with you, Leslie, what's your reflections on misinformation and disinformation and its intersections with the policy system?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. I'll start with climate change because it's the most obvious source of obvious area where misinformation and disinformation is still so rife. So we have a really sort of almost binary media landscape around climate change in Australia. We've got the responsible good actors, like the ABC, like Schwartz Media, like The Guardian, like Fairfax Papers, who do, within the limits of their resources, a fantastic job. And then we've got the Murdoch press style media, which is absolutely actively working against things like renewable energy and any form of climate action. And by extension, they are working against nature, because those two things are so interlinked. So we've got a very sort of almost peculiar, perhaps unique media landscape around those two interlinked things. But I think the most fundamental paradigm that we need to attack in Australia is this idea of nature versus jobs, or nature versus prosperity, as if they are two opposing forces. And I think the main message we absolutely need to sell, be it in the climate change area or the nature area, is that nature, a prosperous economy, good health, well-being of people, is absolutely underpinned by healthy ecosystems and healthy species populations. They're not at odds with each other. We can have both, and indeed, without healthy landscapes, healthy nature, we will be, as people, both spiritually and economically and socially poorer. And I think that's the big binary issue that something like the Nature Media Centre can be superbly well equipped to tackle.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. You've inspired me. And Greg, what's from the other side of the desk, so to speak? How have you seen misinformation and disinformation play out?
Leslie, I will say you're a hard act to follow, really.
Thanks, Greg.
That was fantastic. Thank you. James, I'm going to go slightly rogue on you in that I think Leslie sort of hit on that misinformation and that sort of that nut we've got to crack about nature versus prosperity. I mean, it's a complete furphy. You look at the history of the collapse of civilizations over the last God knows how many millennia, and they're all directly related to the decay and collapse of nature. Um, I see, and I want to pick up on your comment about the hope budget, because I think there are a lot of simple solutions here. I'm running a book about koalas at the moment, and I'm slightly ashamed to admit that it's taken me 4 years to date. I thought it was going to be a 2-year knockoff and it would be easy, but I realised that I wasn't dealing just with science, that I was dealing with politics and culture, and that's a really difficult space to be in. And I quite often get asked by people, are koalas really in trouble? And I normally say yes for one simple reason, and that's habitat loss. And this is an issue that we haven't been able to come to terms with for 30 or 40 years. I mean, one of the researchers, one of Australia's greatest wildlife veterinarians, who's been in this space for 40 years, said to me after I'd spent days and days and days with her, she said, Greg, for all of the tens, the hundreds of millions of dollars that we've spent on good science, on koalas and nature, she said, I think we actually would have been better off simply putting that money into buying and better managing habitat. So, I think the centre and in our understanding of nature, it's not just what we've lost. We quite often go down that sort of that route of, oh my God, we are the worst, look at our track record. But you actually look at Australia and we are still so fortunate in the gifts that we have remaining. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to give people that sense that we still have a lot of options, and that's in some ways quite simple. We need to focus on what we can do, not what we can't do.
I think,
That's-
and I can add to that. I think in terms of that hope budget as well, and this came across in the scoping report talking to journalists, is that you need to build that story and inspire that hope around the actions of people, because people have voices and it's people who will speak on behalf of nature as well. So being able to tell those human stories, like the one that you were just talking about, the anecdotes, the people who are dedicating their lives or spending, 4 years instead of 2 years writing a book. And we've met some really fantastic people in our first pilot program who are just doing incredible things on the ground. Those human stories, but told many times over in different areas with the right audiences, is also what's going to, try and, create that feeling of momentum that, change is possible and that we do have these assets that we can protect and restore, like you were saying, Greg.
Yeah, it's such for me, it's such a kind of critical thing we tackle the misinformation side, but also a critical thing that we give people that hopeful kind of vision of where we can get to as well. Aaron, did you want to add anything to that from your experience from the trenches, so to speak, as someone who's been in campaign land, as kind of trying to drive the change?
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you look at I mean, I guess in terms of successful campaigns, when you look at the elements that they have, it's really clear. They almost all share at their heart some really dedicated volunteers who spend their whole lives or a good chunk of them advocating, and it's about them and their stories as much as and their relationship with that area or that bird. I mean, I think one of the best examples, and one that I'm was really lucky to be able to have a small kind of part in, was the campaign to protect Toondah Harbour, which I know, James, you also did a huge amount on in lots of different roles. And at the heart of that was a combination of some shorebird lovers, and they are very special people. If there are any shorebird watchers out there, they love those birds, and those birds are incredible. They're stories that how far they fly every year. And a local community that wanted to protect an area. So it was a combination of different local advocates, and, you know, with the backing of science and the backing of some, you know, of the politics and the legislative interventions as well. But I think those are the things that really make the difference, is when you've got those passionate advocates at the heart, who can tell that story on behalf of nature, on behalf of the species and the mud substrata, and the you know, the dugongs and the koalas that, you know, were also there.
They speak for the mangroves, for the mangroves have no tongues, right?
And they draw a line in the mud.
Yeah, and Toondah Harbour is a really interesting example, and yeah, it's just going off piste a bit, but from the other side of that, the opponents, or the proponents, the people who wanted to develop, and for those who aren't familiar, this was a proposal to develop a massive luxury development inside a Ramsar wetland on top of critical habitat for the eastern curlew. So just kind of a rubbish proposal to begin with, that, you know, took 6 years or 8 years to knock off. I can't quite remember exactly the time frame. But they tried to do what we call astroturfing. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the term astroturfing, it stands for, it's fake grassroots. So they tried to organise a fake grassroots campaign of residents in support of, you know, this giant development. Now, thankfully, that they were just terrible at it. But other parts aren't. Other parts of industry, just this broader concept of industry that want to kind of don't want to modernise. And what we're seeing actually in the broader economy at the moment is there are some companies that are taking very seriously this idea of being nature positive and trying to do good things for nature. But we are certainly seeing recalcitrants and companies that see their profits in the destruction and extraction of nature without modernising to what can be a more sustainable practice. And it's those recalcitrants that are quite happy to pursue misinformation and disinformation at quite a large scale, but also at a local scale, to win those fights. Leslie, you look like you're about to say something.
Look, it just reminds me, you know, to mention that the disinformation is ripe around the rollout of renewables, because a lot of the opponents of renewables are disingenuously using nature as a sledgehammer tactic to stop, you know, the renewables rollout that we need to tackle climate change. So whether it be saying that whales are going to be affected by an offshore wind turbine or two, or, you know, rolling out solar farms on farmland will somehow destroy nature. I mean, it's complete crap, most of it. And it shows how low the evil forces basically will stoop. And I do think, coming back to the role of a nature media centre, you know, one of its roles will be to tackle that sort of disinformation, which is being used, you know, in frankly an evil and dark way.
James, can I throw in something there? Just
sure,
Leslie. I think this has also got something to do. It's not just about making sure that we're quick off the mark to combat misinformation. It's also, for me, it's got something to do with literacy, because, you know, and again, I'm sorry to come back to koalas, but it's just in my face every day at the moment. In 2014, botanists, ecologists, climate scientists modelled the future extent of Australia's eucalypt forests out to 2085 based on rainfall and temperature projections. Now, it wasn't a good news story. You know, 91% of all eucalypt species and communities will suffer a decrease in their range by an average of 51%. Now, that's a hugely different Australia and a different nature. And these are really almost impossible issues to curate and report. And that's where I see the good news of the Nature Media Centre, because it will make that process so much easier. You know, a nature, fact-checking mega centre, and then unless we understand the conversations we are having about nature now, this is not a moment frozen in time. We are in a continuum here, and unless we've got that literacy and that ability to look forward about what's coming and to be able to manage it, we're not going to be making the best choices.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think that building that literacy across the community is such a vital part of what we collectively need to do, and the Nature Media Centre has such a pivotal role in kind of trying to do that, and it's quite a central part of its theory of change. Unless there's anything else from the panel, I can't quite see the chat just because the way my screen's set up. Erin, you might be able to see it. But
James,
maybe if anyone
James, I might just say one more little thing.
Go for it.
As most of you will be aware, that the Nature Media Centre has been modelled on the Climate Media Centre that's been up and running for quite a few years now. The Climate Media Centre takes a kind of it's a bit of a shadowy role, I suppose, because if you see, for example, an op-ed or an article in the paper about climate change that's written by a farmer or a firefighter or a doctor or a former coal miner, usually those people will have been trained up and helped to get that piece out by the Climate Media Centre. So the Climate Media Centre sits behind all those stories, training people up, helping them, placing stories, getting people out there that are not the usual suspects like me or like James or like our fellow academics, because people expect us to say that sort of stuff. It's really important to, as Erin mentioned before, to get the not so usual suspects out there speaking from their perspectives, from their backgrounds, their expertise, their communities that are not academics or scientists. The Climate Media Centre has, I think, been very successful at doing that, and by the lessons we've learnt about what works and what doesn't work, what we're hoping is that those lessons, and Erin's been collecting those lessons, can ensure that the Nature Media Centre gets off to an even more flying start than the Climate Media Centre did. Yes,
and I think that's 100. Like, I can't. Erin can probably tell you how many times I've said big hats. We need big hats. It's my colloquial term for it. But yeah, we need all those diverse voices out there on nature, not just the usual suspects. I did find the chat, and I can see one in there. Unless Erin or Greg, you've got anything further to add, we'll come to Jim in a moment as well. Will the Nature Media Centre, so here's a first question from Margie, will the Nature Media Centre be targeting key electorates regarding local champions? That is an excellent question. Erin, do you feel equipped to answer that one?
I can have a go. I mean, I guess there's a couple of things. We're setting the Nature Media Centre up to be very clearly non-partisan, and also, I guess, independent of specific campaign agendas, if that makes sense. The role is for it to be a facilitating, enabling organisation. So there's no strategy at the moment that's aligned with specific electorates, but I guess one of the things we are doing is really focusing, I guess, on regional, rural and suburban areas, because those are the areas where the media capacity is least. That's where we've had the most outlets closed. And it's also the space where I think there's more of a capacity gap in terms of focus, that you might otherwise have from big campaigning organisations. So I think in that way, because those are the areas where, I guess Middle Australia is, one of the terms that gets used, where those kinds of people live. And, we have some specific target audiences around those people who don't understand the scale of the crisis, and also those people who are ready, who want to act but haven't. I think that will in some ways overlap in those, marginal electorates more, because that's where the audiences that are more persuadable happen to be.
Yeah, and just reinforcing that, I think that the overlap between kind of where the gaps are, so to speak, those peri-urban, suburban, regional, and rural areas, also happen to be some of the areas that are key determinants of government. So if you think you're Western Sydney, out of suburban Brisbane, regional Brisbane, and also some of the regional areas around WA. If you actually put it, as Aaron says, there isn't a deliberate strategy around it because it's kind of a bit campaign blind. But if you put a overlay of those, the key influential electorates over the key kind of types of regions that the Nature Media Centre is going to focus on, you'll find a very close correlation in terms of seats that tend to change and form government. So thanks for that question, Margie. Feel free also, if you'd like to ask a question in person, to come off mute or put your hand up, and I'll try and find it. I'll navigate the system here. I'm Nick from Gumtree. I'm happy to answer that one straight up, and then maybe I'll throw to you, Aaron, as well, because I think there is very much the strong intention to work with new media creators. And look, just a shout out for Clancy Lester, who is one of those new media creators, who is also now on the Nature Media Centre website. But yeah, we're doing some other work looking at how to engage young people. And unsurprisingly, young Australians aren't reading the ABC or the Australian or the Financial Review. They're getting their information and content through a diversity of channels. And so absolutely, I think the point here will be looking at how we can kind of work with those influencers, social media influencers, and other types of messengers to broaden the church, so to speak. Aaron, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. And I can probably answer Esther's question around the decline of traditional media and, what the role of other types of media are as well. So I think one of the really clear findings from the scoping work we did as well is that those traditional distinctions between press, radio, TV, magazines just really don't exist anymore. And the way that media works and operates with social media is incredibly porous. So, the idea of a press outlet where you have a printed newspaper, which, lots of people do still get. I still get the actual printed newspaper delivered to me on weekends because I'm of that age. But, to get a good press media story up, you also need to have a video, ideally, because the majority of people are reading it on a digital platform. And then the other thing is that, particularly in certain age groups, more than 50% of Australians are coming to that story on the digital platform via social media. So it's incredibly important that the way that we train people and skill people up is platform agnostic to a certain extent, because we're also seeing social media platforms change incredibly quickly. The regulatory space is moving very quickly as well. So I guess what we're looking at doing is, one, supporting people to do environmental reporting and to connect that reporting with the right audiences in the right places. So that environmental reporting can happen in a lot of different places. It can be via a newsletter, it can be on a podcast, it can be with a suburban newspaper, or it can be through someone who is doing their own content creation, working as like a influencer, which I think is maybe not the right word anymore, but people like Clancy, who you see create amazing, engaging content that then also gets picked up by news outlets and run in a story. So I think for the Nature Media Centre, that's the approach we're going to take, is to skill people up to be good communicators and to support newsmakers and reporters to cover nature in the fashion that's going to enable them to connect with audiences in the best way.
We've got a few other questions to go, and I'll try and combine some just so we can get through some of them. So John has asked, how can a local not-for-profit interact with the Nature Media Centre? And Adam's also just reflected in a similar vein, how can someone support the NMC apart from funding if they're, not on the ground or at the coalface? So what are the different ways, how will the Media Centre work, and what are the different ways people can interact with it?
Do you want me to jump in there again, James? So I guess, so if you're a spokesperson, please join. I'm going to post a link here. Very easy to upload a profile. We've got, I think, about 120 people, maybe about another 50 people in the backlog that we're still going through. Please share if you know an amazing nature champion who is, a good spokesperson. Send them to the website. If they don't feel ready to be a spokesperson yet, they can sign up to come along to a future training that we'll be doing.
Yeah. Thanks, Erin. Erica, I'll get to your question first, and then I might tackle Will's. So I agree, Erica. I think initially, because we're in the pilot phase, getting people onto the database has largely been very much the usual suspect. But you'll notice amongst the usual suspects, so to speak, there is, a growing number of new people. And Erin, if you just want to, actually maybe just in the interest of time, the training that is being rolled out to skill up new spokespeople as part of the pilot has just commenced. It was oversubscribed. There was a huge demand in the community. And so what we're seeing is those new voices, they kind of have to go through a vetting process, because the risk that needs to be managed through all of this is that we don't put someone who could be a source of misinformation or disinformation up as a spokesperson. So there is a vetting process before someone becomes a spokesperson to make sure that they're not going to use the access and training and privilege that comes with being a Nature Media Centre to kind of then be, go out and say they're anti-climate or they're anti-this. But that is being built, is what I'd reassure, and it's kind of that process of it takes time to bring on those more diverse voices.
James, can I just jump in for a moment?
Yeah, go for it.
Can I ask you a question? If either side of politics, major side of politics, offered money for the Nature Media Centre, would you accept it? I mean,
absolutely not.
Leslie has horror stories and memories, no doubt, of the Abbott era and the original climate iteration. Was it council? Not. What was it, Leslie?
Climate Commission.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, James, does government money contaminate this process?
No. Sorry, I appreciate your kind of maybe not too familiar with the Biodiversity Council, but I kind of see us getting government funding anytime soon. As much as we can play nice with government, we're also similar to the Climate Council, one of the key orgs that holds them to account and speaks truth to power. So we don't seek. We have done one fee for service as a council, not as the Nature Media Centre. As a council, we've done fee for service advising South Australia on the delivery of their biodiversity strategy, which actually has resulted in quite a good biodiversity act in that state being made. So, we have done some fee for service, but it's very small bickies, and certainly would never take anything that could contaminate our mission or direction. So just to reassure anyone on that, and if we were approached, I'd say no, because of that risk. William, a specific demographic, we're running a little bit behind time. So is there a specific demographic that you're targeting with your media releases? And is there a focus where you get a bigger response, positive reaction? I don't think the Nature Media Centre has done any media releases as of yet.
No, not as the Nature Media Centre. So I guess the way that we'll work is to support our nature spokespeople to pitch stories to media, you know, and skill them up and prepare them for getting into media coverage. We won't be going out as the Nature Media Centre itself. And we've only just, so I guess in terms of the timeline, so we started building the database, I think in April, and we've just, we started running our first training program in August. So everyone's got one more training to do, and then we'll have our first cohort of about 20 people ready to go. So don't have a lot of data to say what works better, but we have got some amazing stories coming through already, like both big and small. So, you know, people who are doing revegetation in Phillipson's prom to create connection. We've got a huge national story about the shortage of native seed, as yet unpublished piece of academic work about seabird mortality and sea level, sea temperatures. There's a woman who's doing biodiversity friendly fire breaks that we're really looking forward to trying to pitch something. So I guess where we're going to be focused is, like I was saying, those regional, rural, suburban areas where that capacity for both media and campaign support is least.
As opposed to demographics, right?
Yeah, so, yeah, as opposed to specific demographics.
We might, just in the interest of time, so thank you all for those questions. I can't see any left there, so that's fantastic. Maybe Jim, you've been sitting here patiently as someone who's kind of facilitated this discussion, so thank you so much for everything. How do you see the media shaping Australia as a philanthropist? Why are you excited by the idea of the Nature Media Centre and the role it can play, given what you've heard and what you've experienced?
Thanks, James, and welcome from Gunai country in Gippsland. And good to see so many friends around the room, and congratulations on the great work that all 5 of you or 4 of you are doing. It's fabulous. So yes, philanthropy plays a small role in hopefully funding at the right place at the right time, but also facilitating. So I'll give a couple of quick deposits into the Hope budget to illustrate that. Both Erin with shorebirds and Gregg with koala have hit on one of the key intervention strategies, and that's protection and security of habitat. So just this month, we've facilitated the purchase of extensive salt marsh island areas in Gippsland, and that's there's 22% of the migratory shorebird habitat that we've been able to secure in that, and that's been a process going for a few years now, where we work with community and private individuals and funders to actually transition that habitat from private and sometimes agency or corporate into community not-for-profit. But that segues into the second deposit into the Hope budget, which is also Gippsland-based. But the last year there was a independent commercial newspaper in South Gippsland that was one of the 161 statistics of the death of the community newspapers, and the community then came to me to say, well, what can we do? And we've developed the resources to be able to facilitate community not-for-profit organisations. So I said, well, why don't we just do one for the newspaper? And the locals grabbed that and set up Prom Coast Echo Link, employed journalists and editors and We tapped into a lot of resources, but that's been successfully published now for over 6 months, and it's become a real signal to the community. But it's interesting, they see the community as the 5,000 or 10,000 people living in the area, and yet there's 50 or 100,000 visitors to that area primarily from Melbourne. So there's layers and layers in this stuff. But what it did highlight was that the 1 or 2 journalists that they can afford to employ have got to do 7 articles a day. So why not give them the quality and the right size pre-material for their articles, and then multiply that with 161 communities around Australia, because it's these communities that are living in largely these environmental high biodiversity areas that are ultimately the ones that have got the most impact. So, yeah, looking from a philanthropic lens, as a lot of us do, we're taking a system approach. So bottom up, top down, how can we fill the gaps? How can we get leverage? How can we get impact? So that's an example where we know from the bottom up what resources are needed. We then switch around to the top down. One of the things that was missing from the top down is the united voice of environmental science and the consistent voice. And Gregg's mentioned this. Our responsibility is to be consistent and not just flip with the news cycles. So that's over the journey where we've funded a lot of the lead peak bodies like like AEGN itself, and ELCA and Biodiversity Council and Climate Councils and others, but tasking them and resourcing them to give that authentic, consistent, genuine voice day in, day out. And so the setting up the Biodiversity Council, as you know, was filling one of those gaps. The Nature Media Centre is the clear outcome of the initial research that was done, that the science was there. People recognised the value of nature, but didn't recognise the loss and the accelerating loss of nature. So I think this is just a brilliant strategic response from that, but not reinventing the wheel. The Climate Media Centre has learnt the hard lessons, and I don't see the demise of the press as an issue in itself, but it's as an opportunity again for community to come back the full circle. Newspapers started as community voices. The environment started as community conservation under the Commons, and I think part of our role is to facilitate that so that we restore agency to the community, give hope, and enable next gen to then be able to get on and do the heavy lifting that's required, and we just put some dollars into the hope budget.
It's always building the hope budget. We're almost at time, so I just thank you all for that. I just wanted to leave everyone on the call just with where things are at with the Nature Media Centre. So it's in its pilot phase. It is a joint project with Pew and Tim Nichols on the call. Thanks, Tim, and ALCA, the Australian Land Conservation Alliance. And the project is at the moment, we're looking to build it up over 3 years. We're really seeking support for the first year of operation, but would very much welcome support for over the full 3 years. Our current funding need for this year, at the end of this financial year, is for approximately $250,000. So we'd really welcome, if anyone is interested in backing the Nature Media Centre, please reach out to myself, Erin, or even Kate at Rendere. I'm sure she'd happily have pass you on to us as someone who helped organise this session. It has been a really exciting project to be a part of, the scoping and the building and the partnerships in particular. You know, we're really grateful to the work and effort that the Nature Impact Collective, that Rendere have, the Nature Impact Collective members have done to support us to get to this spot. But we know that if we want the Nature Media Centre to have the type of impact we've been talking about, the type of impact we've seen with the Climate Media Centre, with the Science Media Centre, we need to build that long-term stability for it. So we're really excited about it as well, and we're certainly here to take any questions that you may have. Hopefully everyone has the prospectus that was sent out with the invite. If not, again, happy to share that as well. We're a bit over time, so I just want to say thank you all for making the time for those extra 3 minutes of grace. Thank you very much for the speakers. I hope you have a fantastic night. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thanks, both.